This is the Chucktown Wind Report extended outlook from Friday, July the 31st, going through Monday, August the 3rd. So from our last forecast, we talked about a frontal boundary approaching from the west and then stalling inland. And that is exactly what is going on right now. So as you can see on this surface map, here is the frontal boundary. It is about mid to upstate South Carolina. It does span all the way up from the northeast down into the Gulf, and most of the energy is going to be focused in this area of the Gulf, and we're going to have to really watch that because of this high pressure to the north. As we've talked about before, high pressures to the north pushing down into these undulating boundaries, these east-west boundaries, as they get into the Gulf area, especially with high pressure to the south, you get this you get this assistance for rotation in this area. So definitely an area to watch over the next few days as this boundary dips down into the Gulf Stream and taps into quite a bit of moisture. Locally for us, what we're going to be looking for is this boundary to stall inland. It may come across the coastline just for a brief period and then back inland again. It could make for a few messy conditions. It looks rather dry at this point, but some of these low pressures like this one right here may be tracking along it. And we could get one or two of these smaller low pressures to bring a little bit of moisture up from the Gulf for us. So some much needed rain for South Carolina if that does happen. But for right now, we're not seeing a whole lot of activity on radar. But real quick, I want to look at the aviation product from NOAA, and this is called ADS. And I like to look at this for the low-level jetting ahead of these cold fronts. So there's still an upper level ridge over Texas biting down into this front, and I have a feeling that is why it is so dry and so weak in our area. But if we look at if we go up in elevation at 3,000 feet, we start to get an idea of what the low-level jetting. I usually pin low-level jetting around 3,000 to 6,000 or 3,000 to 9,000 feet ahead of a cold front, and what we're seeing here is a westerly, for right now at least, a westerly kind of a mid-level jet, and then as we get to 6,000 feet, we don't see a whole lot. So there's not really much ahead of this front. Most of the gradient is offshore out this way, where you can see where that low-level jetting is pushed away from us. So I'm not really anticipating a lot from this front, even though it's inland, because we don't have a very strong surface high pressure built into the coastline right now. It's building in very slowly from the east, but this low-level jetting is not showing very much, and even if we go higher up, we probably will see it drop off even more, and you can see calmer winds at 12,000 feet. So that's taking a quick look at the aviation chart. Now, if we look at the jet stream, for right now, we see just a very broad dip in the jet stream. If this were more pronounced down into the south, we could expect more energy and stronger low-level jetting ahead of the front. But for right now, most of that jetting is a little bit north of us, up into Pennsylvania and up into the northeast. And as we go in time, this jet stream is not really dipping that far into the south, so we're probably not going to see very much energy from this cold front. It will, like I said, it will slowly fizzle out, and as this jet stream starts to lift, it will completely fizzle out, and then we start to see another dip in the jet stream in Tuesday next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, where we'll probably have another boundary drop down into the region. But even looking at this, it's probably going to end up being one of these east-west undulating fronts that wants to go to the south but just can't quite get its act together. Alright, so let's take a look at water vapor loop. And we can see now there's not a whole lot of moisture. It's broken in spots, so we see a little bit of clouding, a little bit of convection in this area here. We see an upper level trough trying to make its way into the coastline. Now with surface high pressure and a broad upper level trough, we don't see these sea breeze builds as much because we don't have a lot of divergence allowed from the surface high pressure to the east. So I'm not expecting too much today. I think let's go back to the surface map. And so what we have a lot of troughing out here in the Atlantic Ocean, not a lot of dry air. And so for sea breezing, for higher winds, what we would need is drier air being pushed in along the coast, and then we would need this low-level jet to be a little bit stronger, and then we have this synoptic southerly flow coming in from the Bermuda high pressure with a little bit drier air, and that would get our sea breezes up. However, I'm not really seeing that today, so I'm probably going to pin the wind speed somewhere between 9 and 13 knots, and with some potential, if we do get a coastal ridge built in where that air does dry out and we get abundance of sunshine, we could see these numbers come up. So the models are, I think they're going to be a little bit jumpy when we take a look at them, just because there's so much moisture and low pressure in the area, along with surface high pressure being a little bit further removed, that it's going to be hard to get any kind of real build for the afternoon, or moderate builds. So let's take a quick look at the earth.nullschool.net map, and then we'll go to our local level. So as we can see, here's this upper level ridge in Texas, and you can see these strong winds along the southern tip of the jet stream, the southern end of the jet stream, where it's bulged down into the south and then wrapping back around. And this wind here is moderate at the upper levels, and that is what's going to keep that area of low pressure that we talked about earlier. This is high shear environment, upper level shear environment, especially with this trough right here. So nothing really expected to develop off the coast, and thunderstorming will be at a lower level, because remember, we talked about in the last forecast, this upper level shear prevents cloud tops from building higher, and it limits vertical stacking to a point where they can't get a stronger surface rotation going because the storming is limited. So let's look at the surface level, and let's see where our surface high pressure is coming in and where that low pressure is that we talked about. And here it is right here. It's barely low pressure at this point. The National Hurricane Center gave it a 10% chance at best, and an area of disturbance that never even got an invest label. And it is going to continue to drift off to the north and the northeast. But at the surface, you can see just a little bend in the wind field, and that represents where the low pressure is. It's skirting the North Carolina coast right now. This area is once again just an area of disturbance. It's not going to develop into anything tropical, and right now the area to watch is down here. So we can see the ridge of high pressure building back in from the east. This is the core center out here, and then here is another lobe of high pressure that is building in as this entire northern Atlantic ridge is building back in from the east. Here's Bermuda right here, so here's the next lobe of high pressure that's going to develop. This is going to be a slow one. As this frontal boundary fizzles out, this more moderate gradient should meander closer to the coastline, but it may not be until early next week before we see it. We could have some gradient activity meandering in and out of the coastline, but until this air dries out over the southeast and that boundary fizzles away and this air builds back in, we won't really see any significant build. So really, in a nutshell, I'm going to go back to the surface map, and I'm just going to go ahead and call for 9 to 13 knots today, with some potential. If we do get a coastal trough built in along the coast to dry that air out, we could see higher numbers. And we're looking at 9 to 13 knots for today, and then probably through the weekend, I would imagine. So not a whole lot there. I'm going to go to the local level and take a quick peek at what's going on. So right now we have Folly Beach is showing 11 knots west-southwest, more of a westerly flow. This is kind of a land-breezing flow. Some of the southerly element built in from some nocturnal jetting, and if we look at Isle of Palms, we see 7 knots. We have 11 knots at Folly Beach. I think last night we probably had a nocturnal jet. Let's take a look. And somewhere around 2 a.m. we had about right around 20 knots with it looks like about a 24 knot gust. Around between 2 and 3 a.m. looks like there was some nocturnal jetting, some healthy nocturnal jetting at that. And if we look at Isle of Palms, we might see a little bit of that too, usually a little bit less north of the harbor. And we had about 14, 15 knots between 2:30 and 4 a.m. So at best, I would say that our build for the Isle of Palms area this afternoon may see something like this at best. But like I said, again, I'm calling for 9 to 13 knots. And if we look at Folly Beach, I don't think we're going to see 20 knots today. We may see 12 to 16 knots like we saw at Isle of Palms, but this isn't really going to be indicative of what the build could look like today, because number one, it didn't hold, and number two, we have a lot of low pressure in the area and troughing. So not expecting much from there. If we look at the model, let's look at the model output for Folly Beach. And I'm going to let those load. This westerly flow is going to burn off, and then the sea breezing will pick up at some point, probably late morning to midday. And if we look at model guidance, For this afternoon, we see a lot of jumpiness going on, and the high resolution rapid refresh, the 3 kilometers, the highest resolution model we have in the model suite. This one's extremely jumpy. I have a feeling it's probably due to some of the moisture and thunderstorming that could be developed today with heat mixing in with a lot of this moisture. And I think that some of these other models are reading the same thing. Now, they're all coming up with a south-southwest flow for this afternoon. And some of them are higher than the North America model 5K. This green really brings it up the highest, and that looks like it could be bringing it up to 13, 14 knots. However, I'm going to hang back and say 9 to 13, and as we get into the weekend, you can really see a lot of jumpiness going on. Westerlies nighttime, over to southerlies during the day. So for the Chucktown wind report, in a nutshell, I'm going to call for this troughing to sort of hang around. The boundary's going to fizzle out slowly, and it won't really dry out. The atmosphere, I don't think, is really going to dry out until we get into early next week. So pretty much through the weekend, I'm going to call 9 to 13 knots every day until this boundary begins to fizzle out when we see drier air. We'll keep the southerly regime. We'll have westerlies overnight, maybe even northwesterlies fade out into modestly building southerly sea breezes with potentials possibly gaining a knot or two each day until we get into Tuesday, where we are likely to see a higher build. Once again, I'm only going through Monday, but as we get into early to mid next week, we could see something different. So that will do it for the Chucktown Wind Report, and have a good weekend.